In this video, I want to talk about summary ranges. This problem is a problem on Leetcode that I want to solve, and I want to show you guys how pretty much I've done it. And maybe my solution has been different from your solution, but we'll go with it. Pretty much the problem says, given a sorted integer array without duplicates, return summary of its ranges. Pretty much what we can assume is that we're given an input of an array, which here you can see you have a vector, int, array of integers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the output is pretty much continuous ranges. So here we have 0, 1, 2, 4, 5, and 7. So 0, 1, 2 are continuous, so our output is going to be from 0 to 2. Then we have 4 or 5, those are continuous, so 4 to 5. And if it's only a single number, then we're just going to have that single number. If here we would have had a 3, then actually it would have been 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here we would have had from 0 to 5, and then just 7. So from these two examples, you can really, out of a lot of problems, some problems take a long time to figure out. Sometimes they don't. But this problem, even for a medium type problem, I feel like it was really easy to figure out what they're looking for right off the bat. So the first thing that we can think of is, what do we need? And obviously we're probably going to need an output array, and that output array is going to have to be of type string. So the way I'll write that will just be a vector or an array of a string value called res. And also, just for size purposes, I'll just say nums.size instead of having to write nums.size every single time. And then for my base case, when you think of this, what are base cases? And could be hundreds of base cases. Maybe there's just one. So right now, the main thing I could think of is, what if this array is empty? And instead of having to go through the whole algorithm, then I can just right off the bat return an empty array. Because if it's an empty array, then I'm going to most likely return an empty array. And obviously, we're always going to assume that there is an array. So I'll just do that and return res. So right here, I'll just write my base case. Empty array. And if we think throughout the whole process another base case that we can write down, we can do that as well. So the first thing that I can think of is, how do I pretty much solve this? So what I can think is obviously I'm going to have to go through the first one, the second one, the third one, but at the same time, I'm going to be looking at the one after. So that's pretty much the way when I solve this, how I think about it. If I go to 0, how am I going to know it's continuous? Those are things that I have to think of. But no matter what, when I'm on this index, I'm going to have to look at the next one before. And then maybe when I'm in this index, I'm going to have to think of the next one before. So no matter what, we're going to loop through this array. So to loop through that array, we're going to do a for loop. Loop through array. Loop through input array, which is given by nums. So here we're just going to do our regular. And if you guys do care about memory space, we're also going to try to solve this with the least memory space, which here we're only going to use this vector, and hopefully that's the only data structure. Not only are we going to think about performance and big O time, but we're also going to try to write it with the least amount of pretty much data structures that we can. Only data structure that we would need as of now. Obviously, as we write the algorithm and we try to solve the problem, we can think of different scenarios if we need another one. And as this goes, since we're going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the next thing that I can think of is, if I get here to 1, I'm going to need some type of state to know what the 0 that I went to, that like I'm hearing the 1 and then the 2. So I guess from when I'm just thinking about it, I like to write things down, but since I'm in the computer, I'm just gonna write down. I will most likely have, like a start at I, and then I'll also have an end at I. So I will start and end at these variables. So even though I'm in the for loop, so even though I'm at 0, I'm gonna want to loop until I find the continuous. And then whenever we do this for loop again, then within the code, I'll try to fix it, because obviously my goal is to get this, n time. And if it's n squared, then it's n squared, and then from there you can find different solutions. But as now, my goal is to just go through pretty much these one by one. So the first one is 0, so which pretty much is start equals 0, because pretty much these are the index, and then end equals 0. So what I want to know is how many of these, which is pretty much, am I going to end on? Because obviously I know that I'm starting at index 0, but where am I ending? Because if I know where I'm starting and I know where I'm ending, then I can pretty much eventually tell the for loop, this is where I ended, so you don't have to loop through the next one. We ended in this index, so you can pretty much, after the 0, you pretty much end up here in the 4, so you don't have to count these 3 because we already counted these 3. So that's pretty much the approach that I want to make. So, and the next thing is, that I want the values of the continuous sequence, or pretty much the index. So there's two things that I want to do is we aren't going past the array index. So what if it's the 7? If I'm in the 7, then I don't want to pass the index. And another thing is the next iteration value equals to the previous value plus 1. So besides the fact that I want to make a case where we aren't going past the index, I also want to make a case of where, let's say we're on 1, the next iteration, which is 2, the next iteration, okay, so let me think. So I want it, so the next iteration, so I want this 2, okay, because what I want to do is once I have 0, 1, 2, then I want like the next value, which is this 2, to equal me plus 1. Because if I have 2 and the next one is 3, then I want to keep that value. But if the next one is 4, then it's not my value plus 1, then I don't want to keep that. Because based on what the problem is telling us, we need that next value, and it has to be in sequential order. So it has to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. It can't just be 2, 10, 15. Has to be in order numerically. So to do that, and I guess I can explain it again, is the first thing is we aren't going past the array index, and so I wouldn't do a while loop, because I want to do while we aren't passing the array index and the next iteration value equals the value plus 1, then we can add our end and we will know where our end is. So what I'm going to do is do if end is greater than start, or actually, no, what I want to do is, well, end plus 1. So this index or this index or this index, if that plus 1, so the next index is less than my size, if it is less than my size, then I'm good to go and I don't have to worry about anything. If it's not, then that means I'm passing the index and I should be running this while loop. The next thing is if I'm here, which is this 1, that means that the next iteration value, which is this 2, which means that is nums n plus 1, so that next iteration value has to equal myself plus 1. So that's num n plus 1. And let me explain that one more time. This right here means that instead of I just did the 1, let me do a 2 example. I'm in the 0, I'm in the 1, I'm in the 2. The 2 is going to check the next number, which is 4, but it must be 3. And then does that equal my same number, 2 plus 1, because this is what it should be. So it should be 3 for it to be continuous. So it should be 3, and it's not equal, so that's why it's going to stop. And I know that my end is index 0, 1, 2. So I know my end is index 2. So the ways this problem is gonna be solved is stops at index 2. And what I know, or what I could do, is I wrote that end state for a reason, because I want to keep those values. So I know that end plus plus. So what I'm going to do is that 0 is going to go. It works because the next value is 1, and I'm telling it that that 0 plus 1 it should be 1. So then I go to this, and then that goes to first index. Then I'm going to do 0, 0 compared to another one, and compare plus 1, that's 2. So then that's index 2. Then here is going to compare to the next one, and itself, and plus 1 to itself, but as 3, so I know that it can't correlate, so this stops at index 2. So I know that my start is 0 and my end is at index 2. So now, since I know that my start is 0 and end is at index 2, then what I can do is so pretty much what I want to do is if end start, if there are multiple numbers in continuous. So here, if there's a continuous, we're going to have this arrow. If there's no continuous, then we won't have an error. So I just want to make a base case for that. So if n is greater than start, there are multiple numbers in continuous, or pretty much if end, is not equal to start. Because if start was 0 and this was just 3, then our start and our index would be in the same. End and start will be the same. And if they were the same, then we don't need an arrow, pretty much. So what I'm going to do is do if n is greater than start. In my new array, which is called res, right here, I'm just going to push. I'm going to do res dot push back, or push those values, which is pretty much num start plus num end. So it's going to push is going to push 0 and 2. But I want the arrow, so I'm going to do an arrow here, because num start is the index, which remember we got 0, so that's 0, and doing this while loop, we ended at index 2, so that's 2. And one thing is that these are integers, and we don't want those integers, we actually want numbers. So let's change that to string for C++. And if you have another language, then you can change that. Oops. And for this one, we can also have a toString. And if not, then obviously we're not going to add an arrow, and then we'll do the same thing, which would be just res.push back and then nums start, because that's where we started, and obviously we want to change it to a string. So that works. And then after that, all we want to do is pretty much here return, well actually, once we're done with this whole for loop, we want to return our array. But one thing that I forgot to tell you is that actually the next iteration, we just did that 0, and we did 0, 1, 2, and we ended up here. This next iteration though is just going to go to this 1, and this is going to do that whole thing again. So technically it's going to run O(n squared), and I actually don't want to do that. What I want to do is, since we did that 0 and this while loop went through 0, 1, 2 and pretty much stop here, what I can say is, oh, I just start at 4 and then do 4, 5, stop, and then start at 7. So you don't have to do this. So how do I even do this? What I do is, since we stopped at index 2, what I can say is I just do end, not index 2, but the next one, which is 4. So I can say index 2 plus 1 is I. So now when I go back to here, to 13, it's not going to start at this next index, which technically if I would have done that would be index 1, but now I'm going to start at index 3. And let's see how that runs if we run our code. So there's an error. C++ requires specific for all declarations. Okay, so this should be int. So I'm seeing here that I have a wrong answer. So it skipped 4 and so actually for some reason it didn't calculate everything right. So let me look back and see, maybe I made an error somewhere. Actually, if I do this, that will give me, there we go. So real quick, what ended up happening was, in C++, if I would have done that A++, it would have most likely skipped this part. So if I just delete this, it's not going to calculate my next one. My next index to be 0, 1, 2, 3. It's just going to be 0, and then what I tell it to. And then pretty much just keep on doing that the whole way through. So here, when I submit it, as you guys can see, my runtime is faster 100% of C++ on my submissions. My memory usage was pretty much one of the best. The only data structure I pretty much had to use was this vector string, and it ran through all the cases. If you guys have any other questions, let me know.